You know that trend where it's like, you wanted complicated female characters, but you couldn't even handle her. Or you want essay representation, but you couldn't even handle him. I would love to open up this conversation a little bit more to include the discourse around really flawed characters. Or even just characters with flaws. Because in the past 5 years or so, I've seen two dominant reactions to flawed characters in popular media. Number one, either they are baby girl, small bean, they've never done anything wrong in their life and have all of their horrible actions excused by their tragic backstory. Or two, the complete opposite, where they are treated like the devil incarnate, inexcusable for their actions, no matter what has happened to them in the past, and no effort on the part of the audience to understand that character in a meaningful way, with audiences acting morally superior to everyone that actually does like that character. And in case you haven't figured it out yet, neither of these are good. Hello, ladies, men, and non-binary friends. Welcome back. I do think that this issue has to do with declining media literacy, but that is only one part of this issue. The other, which I haven't seen addressed, is that when people watch a piece of media, they often look to have a good guy and a bad guy. Obviously, for most people, they want to root for the good guy or who they perceive to be the good guy. And in doing so, they justify liking this character through any and all possible means, which often leads to those people completely washing away that character's flaws or really anything interesting, which is, of course, a huge problem. Conflict is the literal driving force of most plotlines, and complicated characters are some of the most interesting that we get to experience in a story. We as an audience don't want a character to be perfect. We don't want a character that has solved all of their problems and is essentially at the end of their character arc. That is boring. The whole point of a story is to see characters overcome challenges, and for most stories, at least hero stories, we see them make difficult choices to become a better or worse person. Even the most honorable heroes have made unethical choices. That doesn't mean that they are inherently a bad person or should be fully condemned. Critique can certainly be offered, but we have to start looking at these characters realistically. No one is going to make the perfect choice every time. No one is going to make the most rational choice every time. No one is going to make the most emotional choice every time. And we have to stop expecting them to. We hold these fictional characters to higher standards than like real people in our lives. And I think that that is just really, I think that's wild. I think as a general point when engaging with stories, there's nothing wrong with having favorites. There's nothing wrong with not liking a character because they don't have the same morals as you or whatever. And also recognizing that this is fantasy. It is fiction. It is not real. These characters are not real. And arguably the most important point of this entire video, you are able to engage with a character that has flaws or has things wrong with them without being seen as a terrible person. I just want to remind everyone of that because I feel like we often forget and we're afraid of being that person that's going to romanticize those flaws and those really terrible things that a character does. You can have meaningful engagement with a character and enjoy them, even if they are not the most moral or ethical. I talked about this on my TikTok, and I actually got a lot of thoughtful comments. I feel like a lot of fans just don't have the patience to follow complex character arcs anymore. Like if a character is a quote bad person at the start of the series, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to still be at the end. Be patient, people. Character arcs take time and characters grow and change. That's part of the fun. I personally love characters who are morally gray. I've seen a disturbing trend of people seeing a character they think is cool and just deciding, that's me. So as soon as the character does something they wouldn't do, they cry, quote, bad writing. I also feel like anytime something bad is being done by characters in media, people claim it's being, quote, glorified or romanticized simply by being written about, right? And then the fandom ends up doing the glorification and missing the whole point. I judge characters and people by intentions and reasons for those intentions, and I will love their flaws because I know I would likely do the same in their situation. Yes, I wish more people would get this. You can compartmentalize your own values without it affecting the joy of loving a character. Frankly, a lot of the time I'm more engaged with morally gray than the, quote, good, because their journey can be so interesting. They can go in so many directions, from anti-hero to villain to a secret third thing. Who knows? Love it. I don't get the, quote, modern way of enjoying shows and characters. I've always had a detached enjoyment of shows, knowing full well it's just a story. This is why I'm low-key terrified as an OC creator to make my main story as no one in it is a, quote, good person. If anyone gets dumbed down, I swear to God I'm gonna cry. It's for real so scary. Like, bro, I'm not problematic. I just like writing more complex characters who do bad stuff sometimes. Simple example, having your favorite Disney character be a villain because their villain song slaps. None of us try to justify that, we just know the song slaps. My problematic fave is Smeagol. lol, lol. He's a silly little guy and I love him so much. That's my son. When people call the friends from Devil Wears Prada, Lily from The Princess Diaries, Eloise Bridgerton, quote, the villain, like, that's not what a villain is. They're not even antagonists. People always being adamant on picking a side when engaging with fiction, like, you don't have to do that. I also think it's because people have the false notion that liking a character means automatically supporting all of their actions. Not to mention, there's different ways of liking a character. I really dislike the constant need of fans to justify their favorite characters so they don't feel bad liking them, instead of just liking them. Another part of it is like this weird morality thing. Like, people genuinely seem to think they're better or more righteous than other people just because they like the hero or root for the good people in the story. A lot of fandom now has been infiltrated by these weird puritans that try to moralize every single choice you make. People can not like a hero because they're annoying, or they can like a villain because they relate to them more than the protagonists, or the villain can just be straight up written more dynamically and then people will try to turn that into a moral issue and have a conniption about it. Very weird. Yes, you described it perfectly. So many people think you can only love a character if you, quote, agree with them, and that liking them must mean you have the same ethics as them in real life. Another problem is people are now engaging with fiction specifically to project themselves onto characters instead of just enjoying it. Yes, like, I don't understand why people have to see themselves in a piece of media to enjoy it. If anything, the more I can disengage with reality, the better. This is such a nice comment from one of my friends. I have so much to say about this. I'm so glad someone finally brought this up, and especially that it was you, because you always completely get it. This style of media conception is frightening, TBH. Especially the expectation that it's how everyone else is supposed to consume it as well. I've always engaged with and enjoyed stories from a distance, likely in part because academia. But people expect you to have this moral standard for characters where none of them can be flawed, and you must be engaging with a piece of media because you want to be part of it or something. It drives me insane they make characters so one-dimensional and boring. Like, please, it's not a bad thing that characters are flawed. Even with characters I don't like, I'll end up defending them due to the extreme mischaracterization and villainizing of them. Like, hate them for the right reasons. People also cannot grasp the characters that aren't explicit antagonists / sympathetic stories and motives can still be written to be disliked. They can be written to be a bad person. Quote, if you think this character was bad, do not interact. You don't understand him at all. And yet by refusing to acknowledge that he was meant to be perceived as a bad person in most capacities, you've demonstrated how fundamentally little you know of literature and the character itself. Like, yeah, it's not really our say, but I'm sorry they're not hiding it. And I agree with every comment that was said here and every sentiment expressed. This, of course, does not mean that harmful depictions don't exist or that every character is exempt from critique. But the critique should come from the characters being badly written, not necessarily because the character was doing bad things. Characters that are written as stereotypes for certain groups or inaccurate portrayals of a grave subject matter are, in my opinion, where the focus of audience critique should be. For example, Game of Thrones and their use of sexual assault being mishandled, disrespectful, and genuinely harmful to SA victims. But SA can be written into stories in a meaningful and respectful way, and disregarding that entire experience from all storytelling is not the answer, even though there are people that feel that way. It's totally fine if you don't like watching stories that have sexual assault in them, especially if that's something that you've experienced. But just because something doesn't suit your interests or tastes doesn't mean that it is necessarily a bad thing to include in stories. I admit, I was once one of those people because I was convinced that there was never going to be a writer that would do this topic justice. As an SA survivor myself, I'm exhausted by the harmful and triggering portrayals of SA victims in media. But then I played Baldur's Gate 3, and Astarion's story really resonated with me. And I was shown that a survivor's story could be written with respect and complexity. Astarion himself is a very flawed character. Some might argue that he's just straight up unlikable, which might confuse some of you, because how could he be good representation of an SA victim if he's unlikable? Because there is no such thing as a perfect victim. And Astarion is an excellent representation of that. After my assault, I was a lot like Astarion, actually. I was hypersexual, trying to gain back my power. I was self-serving to protect myself, and I was so incredibly angry at the world around me. Despite popular belief, trauma usually doesn't make us stronger. It makes you harder to deal with. And I was so pleased to see an SA survivor portrayed as an actual person with flaws, rather than some demure, helpless waif who accepts everything bad that's happened to her because it, quote, made her stronger. That's why I got so frustrated when players actively tried to wash away Astarion's flaws. He is conniving, he's a liar, he is incredibly self-serving, but of course, why wouldn't he be? He's been a slave to a vampire lord for over 200 years. His backstory informs his character and vice versa. I imagine most people would act like him if they were put in the same position, which is why, on the other side of it, the hate that he gets does not make sense to me either. You're allowed to not like Astarion Ancunen as a character. If he annoys you or if he is just not your cup of tea, I totally get it. But I've seen some ridiculous comments saying that Astarion is like the most evil character in the game, and that is just simply not true. He does have redeeming qualities, whether you want to see them or not, and his bad behavior is informed by the trauma that he has endured. He is clearly someone who hasn't felt safe in 2 centuries, and you as a player are expecting him to be endlessly kind and selfless? No, that is just wild. Just say you don't like him and move on. You don't have to bend over backwards to make him seem like he's fucking Lord Voldemort. I'm still skeptical of whenever SA is included in a story because it is often included for shock value or to further the development of a male character at the expense of a female character. But until I see the portrayal, I won't write it off completely. Unfortunately, the trend that I've seen lately is that rather than engage with difficult topics in fiction in a critical and meaningful way, audiences will write them off entirely. And this includes when characters do morally wrong things. Rather than analyze why a character would do something so horrible, the character is viewed as a terrible person and not engaged further as audience members try to distance themselves from the behavior, despite it being fictional. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with liking a character who is just straight up evil either. There's something intriguing about someone who is just evil for the sake of evil. But it is upsetting to see when a character's evil actions are informed by the things that they've gone through, and that is completely disregarded by an audience. I do think that the only answer to this dilemma is exposure and increased media literacy, so I would love it if you could leave a comment for the algorithm to help boost this video to more people. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this. Please tell me any characters you've seen be completely crucified for the crime of simply being a complex, flawed character. Subscribe if you'd like to see more, and if you really love me, you can support me on Patreon and help me pay for my groceries next month. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye!